The Chernobyl disaster. On a quiet spring night in 1986, a chain of events at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in northern Ukraine took place that would forever alter the course of world history. The 4 nuclear reactors of the power plant, which supplied electricity to millions of people in the area, had been heralded as a technological marvel. Yet on this tragic night, a confluence of human error and poor design caused a catastrophic explosion that would release a deadly cloud of radiation, claim the lives of thousands of people, and have a long-lasting effect on the environment. No one could have foreseen the real scope of the catastrophe that was about to take place as the smoke and flames billowed into the sky. The Chernobyl disaster was significantly influenced by human error. The emergency cooling system of the reactor, which was intended to avoid catastrophic breakdown of the reactor core in the case of a power outage, was being tested for safety by the power plant's operators. They made several errors during the test, including failing to adhere to the correct processes or safety protocols. The operators turned off various safety systems, including the emergency core cooling system and the automated shutdown mechanism, in order to simulate a power loss. The reactor had fewer safety precautions than typical as a result, rendering it more susceptible to catastrophic failures. During the test, the workers saw a number of warning signals from the reactor that the situation was deteriorating, but they decided to disregard them and carry on with the test. The operators made a critical mistake with the control rods and removed too many from the reactor at once, which caused the power output to increase rapidly. When they attempted to reinsert the control rods to slow down the reaction, the graphite tips of the rods caused an even greater surge in power output, leading to the explosion. The RBMK-1000 reactor, which was utilized in the Chernobyl nuclear power station, had some design defects that made it susceptible to a catastrophe if the cooling system failed. One of the design flaws was the absence of a containment building, a structure intended to stop radioactive elements from escaping into the environment in the case of an accident. The design of the control rods for the reactor included yet another problem. By absorbing neutrons, which slows or stops the nuclear process, control rods are used to control nuclear reactions. Graphite-tipped control rods were employed by the RBMK-1000, which at first accelerated the reaction when they were placed into the reactor core. This is because graphite is a moderator, which means that it causes neutrons to slow down and increase their likelihood of starting a chain reaction. Contrarily, the majority of other nuclear reactors have control rods constructed of substances like boron or cadmium, which lack this moderating effect. Furthermore, the RBMK-1000 reactor had a positive void coefficient, which means that if the cooling water in the reactor turns to steam, the reactivity of the reactor increases. In most reactors, the void coefficient is negative, which means that if the cooling water turns to steam, the reactivity decreases. However, in the RBMK-1000 reactor, the steam produced during a loss of coolant accident would have led to an increase in the reactor's power output, which could have led to a runaway reaction and catastrophic explosion. In the Chernobyl accident, a string of mistakes made by people and flaws in the machinery resulted in an abrupt and massive increase in reactor power output. This in turn led to a steam explosion and a subsequent graphite fire that caused the release of a significant amount of radioactive material into the environment, which spread over a sizable portion of Ukraine, Belarus, Russia, as well as certain regions of Europe. Plant personnel suffered immediate fatalities and injuries as a result of the catastrophe, as well as long-term health impacts for those who were exposed to high radiation levels. It's still unclear how many people died as a result of the catastrophe, although estimates range from a few thousand to tens of thousands. After the catastrophe, a sizable portion of the land surrounding the facility was evacuated, and over time, the exclusion zone around the plant grew to encircle almost 2,600 square kilometers. The disaster also had significant economic and social impacts, including the displacement of thousands of people, the loss of agricultural land and crops, and the disruption of local economies and communities. In the years since the disaster, efforts have been made to clean up and contain the radiation at the site of the plant, as well as to provide support and assistance to those affected by the disaster. However, the effects of the disaster will continue to be felt for many years to come. The long-term health effects of the Chernobyl disaster have been well documented, with many people experiencing health issues years after the event. One of the most significant long-term health issues is an increased risk of cancer. Exposure to ionizing radiation increases the risk of cancer, particularly thyroid cancer. Studies have shown that people who were exposed to radiation as a result of the Chernobyl disaster have an increased risk of developing cancer. The risk is particularly high for people who were children at the time of the disaster, as their developing bodies were more susceptible to the harmful effects of radiation. Other long-term health issues include cardiovascular disease, cataracts, and respiratory problems. Exposure to radiation can damage the heart and blood vessels, leading to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. Cataracts, which can cause vision problems, can also develop as a result of radiation exposure. Respiratory problems, such as chronic bronchitis and asthma, are common among people who were exposed to the radioactive particles released during the disaster. The long-term psychological effects of the disaster are also significant, with many people experiencing anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The trauma of the disaster, combined with the ongoing health concerns, has had a significant impact on the mental health of the people affected by the event. The Chernobyl catastrophe also had a profound effect on local fauna and the ecosystem. Many animals were killed in the first explosion, but the long-term consequences of radiation exposure on wildlife have been far more profound. Animals and plants have had genetic abnormalities as a result of the radiation, which has decreased reproductive rates and caused malformations. The numbers of several animal species have decreased in the impacted areas, and some species have completely vanished. Complex ecological consequences have resulted, with some species flourishing in the absence of people, while others struggle to exist in the poisoned environment. Animals at the top of the food chain have greater radiation levels in their bodies as a result of the radiation's effects on the food chain. According to studies, radiation exposure in the region is linked to an increased occurrence of malignancies in animals as well as other health issues. The damaged lands near the Chernobyl nuclear power plant have been developed into a special laboratory for research on the long-term effects of radiation on animals and ecosystems. Scientists have also underlined the possibility for the region to become a wildlife sanctuary because human activities are prohibited in the zone of exclusion, despite the disaster's continuing consequences on the local wildlife and natural environment. In recent years, there has been a significant increase in the number of tourists visiting the site of the Chernobyl disaster. This is partly due to the success of the HBO television series Chernobyl, which aired in 2019 and sparked renewed interest in the topic. It's also because the exclusion zone, which was once off-limit to visitors, has now been opened up for guided tours. The exclusion zone covers an area of approximately 2,600 square kilometers around the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The tours are led by experienced guides who are trained to ensure the safety of visitors and to provide accurate information about the history and aftermath of the disaster. One of the highlights of the tour is the abandoned city of Pripyat, which was once home to around 50,000 people, but is now a ghost town. The city was evacuated in the aftermath of the disaster and has remained largely untouched since then. Visitors can see the abandoned buildings, schools, hospitals, and amusement parks that were once a bustling part of the city. Other sites on the tour include the new safe confinement structure, which was built to contain the radiation at the site, as well as the reactor buildings themselves. Visitors can also see the various monuments and memorials that have been erected to commemorate the victims of the disaster. While the tours are popular, they are not without controversy. Some critics argue that they trivialize the tragedy of the Chernobyl disaster and exploit the suffering of the victims and their families. Others argue that the tours are unsafe and that visitors are being exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. However, tour operators and Ukrainian authorities insist that the tours are safe and vehemently deny any health risks to tourists. They also argue that the tours provide an important opportunity for visitors to learn about the disaster and its impact, and to see firsthand the ongoing effects to contain the radiation and prevent further contamination of the surrounding area. Either way, the popularity of the tours shows that the legacy of the Chernobyl disaster continues to resonate with people around the world, and that there's a great deal of interest in learning more about this tragic event in human history. Unfortunately, the Chernobyl catastrophe was not a lone occurrence, and around the world, other nuclear disasters include the following incidents. 3 Mile Island. On March 28, 1979, a nuclear reactor at the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania, USA, experienced a partial meltdown, resulting in the release of radioactive gases. While there were no immediate fatalities, The incident caused widespread public concern about the safety of nuclear power. Fukushima. On March 11, 2011, an earthquake and tsunami caused a nuclear accident at the Fukushima Daiichi plant in Japan. The disaster resulted in 3 reactor meltdowns, hydrogen explosions, and the release of radioactive materials into the environment. Over 160,000 people were evacuated from the surrounding area, and there have been reports of increased rates of cancer and other health problems among those exposed to the radiation. Kushtim. On September 29, 1957, a nuclear waste storage facility at the Mayak nuclear plant in the Soviet Union exploded, releasing an estimated 20 million curies of radioactive material into the environment. The disaster was kept secret by the Soviet authorities for many years, and it is believed that hundreds of thousands of people were affected by the radiation. Goiânia. On September 13, 1987, a radioactive source was stolen from a medical facility in Goiânia, Brazil. The source was mishandled by those who stole it, resulting in the exposure of many people to high levels of radiation. 4 people died as a result of the incident, and many others suffered from radiation sickness and long-term health problems. If you enjoyed this video, please click on more videos on our channel.